it's kind of like, this is who I am. I'm taking a stance. Like, who wants to come with me, you know? So it's just like, oh, yeah, this is what it is. Like, you know, you're kind of telling the truth right off the bat. So it's like, yeah, let's go.
Welcome to the WazaMedia podcast. WazaMedia is a digital marketing agency that believes in the power of storytelling. We show businesses and individuals how to communicate with laser focus in a media-saturated world. On this episode, I'm excited that we are talking with Esha Todd, a content strategist who creates content for the gaming, tech, and mixed martial arts, or also known as MMA, for those communities. Esha works for Sugar Gamers, a future-forward gaming company that works to unite gamers through emerging technology such as AR and VR.
Quick pause. I want to talk to you about Morning Brew. If you're struggling to keep up with the news cycle and everything that's going on in the world, in business, and in marketing, you need to sign up for Morning Brew's email newsletter. It summarizes the latest headlines in an easy, digestible format for our busy lives. The best part about signing up for Morning Brew is that it's free. Make sure you use the referral link in the description to get signed up. Morning Brew is the best way to stay informed and is also great with your cup of joe or espresso for me. Now back to the episode.
Esha, it's good to see you again. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I am doing great. It has been so long since I saw you in person. For our audience, Esha and I go way back to our high school days. So we've known each other for a long time. We're not gonna talk about ages or anything. We're not gonna give out any of that information.
Right?
No, none of that.
Yeah. There's certain things that remain mystery. So
Yeah, that'll be a mystery. But we do have the love for the arts. And that's how we got to know each other in high school. So good times in the arts when it came to music, when it came to dance and music, and singing, choral, band. I think we, refresh my memory, I think we were in pretty much every type of music program we were back in high school, right?
no, we were definitely those people. You know, spitting lunches in the band room. But yeah, I mean, those are like the good times. I mean, if I didn't have art in school, like I probably wouldn't be the same person. So I feel very privileged in that sense that we had that opportunity at such a young age.
My parents had me on the science track because they wanted me go into medical, and so going into the arts was my escape, and I loved it. I loved it more than doing all the math and science stuff. But
Oh gosh, I
um,
like math and science. That's like when I was in high school. Now I like find it interesting, but still, it's just like me and numbers are not the best of friends. But I can appreciate it now that I'm older and understand that science is important. You know.
science is important, and that's what led to some of the awesome things that you got to play with in your career doing content strategy. But before we dive into our topic about content strategy, Esha, can you tell me a little bit about your story?
Yes. Well, I like to say my story is pretty interesting. Well, I consider myself a writer overall. I've basically been writing like all of my life. And I like to say I'm kind of on this writer's journey to write a book about my life. So I'm in school for creative writing as of right now. But on the side, yes, I am a content strategist for Sugar Gamers. So I write articles. I'm in charge of their social media pretty much on all platforms. My background as far as work is very tech centric. I love technology, especially emerging tech. I'm just obsessed with it. As far as working with virtual reality, I worked for companies like Oculus, Facebook Gaming, you know, pretty much traveled the world, working events, being able to lead teams. It's kind of like a dream job, I would say. So I have a lot of experience with that, with firsthand using that technology, playing the games, playing the software, pretty much playing things that aren't on market yet. So I definitely miss that life, but it is pretty fun to write about it and my experiences throughout the years. So it's cool. And yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. There is also a lot. I mean, I'm also an MMA fan, been in sports media, so covered for like, been to events for like UFC, Bellator, won championship, also traveled the world covering fights. So I have a lot under my belt when it comes to experiences, but definitely right now, as far as my focus would definitely be like tech, gaming, the future, and the arts. So I love creating art, resin art, things like that. Just like you, it's kind of like my escape from everything else that I do. But also, I've just been a really huge in history lately. Like I've been like a really huge history enthusiast. So I think it's coming swell with my writing as far as my thrust for knowledge just never ends. So I constantly just want to keep learning everything. But I also think that mixes really well with emerging tech because I'm kind of always on the, what's happening next. But it's nice having a baseline of like where everything came from. So in a beautiful sense, I think I'm growing older as an adult. So it's fun. But yes, that's me in simpler terms.
I enjoy following you on the gram. If you're not following Esha, we're gonna make sure we plug her Instagram handle, not only on the video version of this podcast, but also later on at the end. Just seeing you play with the Oculus. I've only touched it once. It was at a Facebook event here in the Washington D.C. area, and that was the only time I've ever done it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so after, I think it was seeing you play with it, and I'm like, one day I'm gonna be able to do it, and that opportunity came, so that's awesome. And I love the fact that you get to play with emerging tech and play with stuff before it gets out. I mean, how awesome that must feel to be able to touch stuff that before it comes out of market.
Yes, it's actually pretty crazy because when you think about the pandemic and how everything is going virtual, we're kind of, missing those in-person conventions, like those really big conventions that happen, at CES, like in Las Vegas, where, everyone from around the world, where you get to, these are like prototypes where you get to test out before they actually come on market and you get to talk to the creators firsthand. Those things are just very exciting. Even working events like E3 where you're really on top of like the top pyramid of gaming. So just those experiences, in the industry are pretty much like out of this world. And I feel very lucky to have experienced that. But with the pandemic, I mean, everything's a little bit different. So I think the mindset is switching over to, how do we make things a little bit more digital? This time around, but it's also a learning curve. So I think we're kind of in that in between stage. But for the enthusiasts like myself, it's very exciting, but in a sense, we do have a lot of work to do.
I did feel that CES was pretty underwhelming last month, just because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then I was watching videos and reviews from all the tech writers and tech vloggers, and they were pretty much reviewing the videos of the tech because they couldn't really be there in person to touch it. So it was not the same experience as if, all the reviews where you would watch a video and they would get their hands on it, they would touch and feel. And there's one guy that does like the licking test or the taste test. He just licks all the products. It was crazy, but it's just not the same.
Yeah, you can't lick your computer. I don't think it's going to taste the same, your computer screen. So I feel it.
You could, but there are consequences in doing it.
Yes, exactly.
So
there's always a choice.
Esha, I want to move on to our main topic, which is about content strategy. Now, I know you do content strategy for Sugar Gamers, but for our audience who's still learning about the means of doing marketing, can you give us your definition of what content strategy is to you?
Yeah, content strategy is pretty interesting. I mean, when you think of any type of content basically on any type of platform, it's digital content, it can be, but when you add strategy to it, like you have to add, that's basically adding in like extra layers of a strategic plan, I would like to say. So for instance, like, with Sugar Gamers, in a sense, it's more about, what is the main motive of why we have these social platforms? How do we want to engage with our audience? Like basically, what is the whole premise? Is it just showcasing our work? Are we trying to get people more engaged with conversations, things like that? So it really is like a strategy based on what you are trying to achieve, but it all relies on like the type of content that you're doing. And even with the topic of storytelling and like multi-platform content, I think that's very important, because that's also um, kind of engaging with your audience in more of like an emotional standpoint. So instead of just, going on social media and like, posting here and there without any thought process behind it, that can be really cool. But sometimes you might not necessarily meet your goals when it comes to like data analytics. There's such things as, time optimization, like when's the best time throughout the day to reach, the most people in your audience. So there's honestly so many things, but I think it really comes down to what is your main premise of having social media in the first place, and kind of what is your goal to utilize these tools, because social media is really a tool. So it really just depends on how you utilize that. But yeah, as far as sugar gamers, it's really just, trying to figure out different ways of engaging with the audience, which it's really hard. It's not easy. I think it's more of like a everyday type of job. You have to, not just post things, but, you have to, like certain comments, you have to communicate with these people. You have to make sure, they're kind of coming back to your profile. So there's so many things that I think sometimes people don't think about, but they're honestly so important to kind of just grasp more audience to your profiles. But also, one more thing, there is a difference, I think, between posting on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, even LinkedIn these days. So in my opinion, not the same type of content can be posted on all platforms, because the more you use these platforms, you'll notice like how different the audience is. I mean, just from off the top of your head, LinkedIn versus Twitter, I mean, those are two completely different identities. But it's just kind of learning how do you speak the language of that media platform, because that's pretty much how your audience is going to listen to you depending on. So, but
It's
that's
like
just,
apples and oranges. They're totally different.
they're totally different. It's the language, it's the way you post, it's how much content. Like for instance, like Twitter, you're only limited to certain amount of actual content, like words, versus somewhere like Instagram, where you don't have a limit to content. But then again, a lot of people are scrolling, so it's like, are they going to read a lot of content, or are they just here for images? So you kind of just learning the curve of having a strategy to kind of communicate in all these platforms is pretty much like what's important, but it's kind of the DNA of all of it. But it's fun, it's exciting, it makes you use your brain, but everyone kind of does it different, but it's nice kind of collaborating and thinking of different ideas to do that. It's fun, but definitely hard.
And what people don't realize is that while we're on our phones all day or on our computers on social, people think that it's fun. But from what I understand, from what I heard, a content strategy is almost like posting with an intent. There's intentful purpose for why you're posting, not just to post on a whim. You mentioned some things about the right time, the right place, the type of content, knowing. So for those who are still learning about all these platforms and content strategy, there's a reason why certain things are posted on certain platforms in the way that they are. So I think that's important to know, and I think you brought that out, that it's just not. There is a plan, there's a reason and a rationale for everything that you put out there.
Oh yeah, and even if you study like really big brands, like Google, or things like that, like they really do have like a type of structure when it comes to like an emotional standpoint of how they grasp their audience. And an emotional structure is, in my opinion, like probably the most beneficial, because that's when you start getting your audience to relate. That's when you start kind of understanding your art, or sorry, understanding your audience more. But that kind of gets them out of their shell. It makes them think like you care about them. You're not just kind of aimlessly posting. So in that sense, they're kind of more engaged. Also using specific hashtags or running contests or things like that. Like honestly, there's so many different different ways that you can really approach it. But I think taking some time to kind of understand the psychology of why people post, I think that would be a really good start. Because you can kind of think about it for yourself. If you're in, basically for me, I'm a gamer. I love talking about technology. So in a sense, it's like when I post for Sugar Gamers, it's very easy for me to, kind of come up with a question or things like that. Because you also have to think about, in a way, there's also kind of a lot of competition, especially when it comes to Instagram. Because like I said earlier, you're endlessly scrolling. So why, you have to kind of think, why would someone stop on your post versus all the ones that they scrolled? So thinking about, color blocking and using, different types of color or like the same type of font like throughout, all your posts, basically having some type of consistency. That's always really good to the eye, especially when your posts are kind of being shared all around. So yeah, there's definitely lots of different ways, but I think thinking of the overall picture is probably the best, because you have to have a reason why you're posting it. Like exactly what you said, like you have to have like something behind just making a random post, because everyone can do that all day. But when you're running a business or a brand, you got to kind of take the extra step to really figure out like who your audience is.
When we're talking about content strategy, and I know you work for Sugar Gamers, and I know that you worked for other industries, gaming, tech, and also MMA. Is a content strategy applicable not only for large organizations, large companies? Would you say it would be applicable to, say, small businesses or even personal brands?
Oh yeah, I don't think that personally, I don't think there's a limit as far as the size. Absolutely not. In my opinion, I think if you start smaller, right off the bat, that's probably better. Just so you kind of have this base structure. In my opinion, when you get really big brands and, they kind of have a certain way and you're kind of used to how they're, posting and things like that. But then all of a sudden something changed or they changed their color or whatever. Sometimes with certain people, that change can be hard and it might not be accepted, things like that. I mean, it happens, but I think the earlier that you can do it, the better. But I just think it's important. I think it's important for any type of business to think about, even if you just have your own brand, it can just be one person. So I don't think it's dictated to the amount of people. I really do think having a really strong baseline and having all of your ends covered and then popping out content in an optimizing way is probably like the most beneficial.
So any size, even one person, that's awesome. And the biggest part that I understand is from the perspective of just starting, because then you're working on building the data from there, and the only way out is the only way that you can go is up.
Exactly. Because then it's like, okay, this is who I am. It's kind of like, this is who I am. I'm taking a stance. Like, who wants to come with me? So it's just like, oh, yeah, this is what it is. Like, you're kind of telling the truth right off the bat. So it's like, yeah, let's go. So, yeah, I think it's a very beneficial way to look at it instead of just kind of jumping in with the sharks very early. I mean, you can always test the waters, because like I said, it's not necessarily an easy thing. Like you really do have to take some time to kind of dissect your brand or your business and really figure out, kind of the things that you want to do. But I think, nowadays living in the digital age, social media, whether we like it or not, is, it's important. People look at it all the time. So in a sense, it's kind of like, you kind of have to make it the best you can. But yeah, I think having like focusing on content strategy when it comes to social media is very, very, very important. So if people even look at that, like me, like if you have a business and, you're kind of struggling with social media, honestly, hiring a content strategist to kind of take that ease out of it is a big help, because you won't realize how much that benefits everything else. It's like the root of everything, I think, because you're promoting everything. If you have podcasts, events, you're promoting it all through your social media. You're getting all these people. So in a way that is like the base hub. Or if you're streaming on Twitch, so you can still link that to your social media. So everything can come from your social media if that's like what you want. But yeah, I think it's important. The earlier the better.
I saw a stat for our listeners who are listening. This is being recorded the week after the Super Bowl came out. For those who don't know about the Super Bowl, it's when a bunch of Americans get on a field and throw some pigskin around with a bunch of gear. It's also they call it football, but it's not really. You kick the ball with your foot. Only one person does that. But the one stat that I read related to the Super Bowl is that with the amount of people who watched the Super Bowl, which was like 60 or 70 million people, that is the amount of people that Mr. Beast, a YouTuber, continually reaches on a regular basis.
Oh,
So if we're thinking platform reach, one person who has a channel on YouTube that could reach so many different people versus how much money it takes to produce the Super Bowl game for a couple hours, and then hiring the talent that comes in, celebrities, and then the stadium. I mean, your access to people is definitely cheaper in a sense with social than it is doing traditional methods.
oh my gosh, yeah. And I mean, and I'm excited that you even mentioned that, because yeah, I recently wrote that article about AI, basically AI and social media, basically AI influencers. So in a sense, like basically what you said, like there's certain things that cost a lot of money if you do it in real life versus the virtual world. But now everything, like I said, in the pandemic, there's a lot of things in a high percentage that really turned into a virtual world. So when you think about it, if you couldn't go to work one day or anything like that, like there's ways where these AI influencers or even just figures that you're using can kind of replace you in a sense. So in a way, it's like, they could still make you money. They don't have to call out of work. So it's that idea. And they're very cheap because, I mean, not in that sense, like obviously they're very expensive to create if you're making, the higher graded or the higher quality. But in the sense, versus like, buying a range of actors and a set and things like that, when you can just create a virtual set, or you can create a whole virtual event, versus having it in an actual convention. There's so many different things that I feel this generation is going through. But I think there's a lot of conversation to be had because it definitely is a new avenue for a lot of people. But the ones that are already kind of in this space have been seeing like the ultimate benefits that it can have, especially when it comes to costs. But then again, it's kind of like who's designing these, it's still there's still like some ethics behind the scenes, but at the end of the day, this is already happening. So no matter if we deny it or not, it's already going down. But it's interesting to think about, especially running a business, like in the pandemic. What if your business closes down? What if you already had like a virtual business already set up and you didn't have to necessarily worry about that? I mean, but who's thinking about that if you're not in that field, so I don't know. I'm all about it, but also I'm very engaged on communicating that with people so they are aware of the capabilities of what the digital can do for us these days. It's honestly like crazy. Even with social media, there's apps where you can create like your social media content across all platforms early, and then you can set optimized times and then it'll just post for you. So in a way, it's like, spend a couple of nights like, setting all that up, and then you might not have to worry about that for another month or two. And then all you have to do is just engage with the people, on the actual platforms. I mean, it's literally unreal, like how much this technology can actually help us if it's utilized correctly.
You,
And it's
you brought up a
exciting.
good point. You brought up a good point. There's the content is there, but there's the engagement. If
Yeah.
you and that's the two-way conversation that you're having with your audience on these platforms. Because yes, content is one part, but you're getting feedback through the comments, the likes, or the dislikes,
Yeah.
or the upvotes or downvotes, depending on what platform you're on. And then you take that engagement, and that will help to continue the conversation into other things.
Oh
So
yeah. And it's important too, because you have to also think about, now the algorithms are so intense when it comes to social media, that it's kind of like you actually have to do engagements, going on, other people's pages, making comments, like actually really taking the time to do that, because sometimes, certain posts might not even pop up, so always keeping yourself in the picture is very, very important. But like I said, it's a lot of hard work, but it does take dedication. But, if you do utilize these things, I can guarantee, like, that whole, strategy part, honestly, when it comes to your content, it would be so, so, so beneficial. I think that's like being consistent and being engaging is probably like my two top tier things for sure.
Esha, it was really, really awesome to catch up with you, and you provided a lot of great valuable content related to content strategy. If if our audience wants to follow more about your awesome life on the gram, how can they find you?
Yes, so you can find me at Esha Knows _. So that's pretty much on all platforms, Facebook, Twitter. I'm mostly on Twitter, but also on Instagram. Or you can also follow Sugar Gamers. We're on there as well. You just have to type that in, and it's in there. So, but yeah, thank you. This is great. It actually gets me pumped up for my day. But it's good. How many times do you get to do a podcast from someone from high school? So you get to say that now. We're doing
And
it.
I'm gonna continue to live vicariously through your gram. So I'm excited. Thanks, Esha.
Thanks for watching our video. If you want to learn more about WazaMedia, go to our main channel over here. And if you want to see more podcast episodes, go over here. See you next time.